Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined by my good friend Graham. How's it going, Graham?
Great, thanks. Excited for this.
Super excited for this. So, we're Searching for Dragons. We're the show where we try to explore artists who are into magic and present us and give us new, interesting magical creations and explore magical ideas. And Antonin Artaud was the first person we ever talked about on this channel, and one of the most important artists to Graham, and a big inspiration for this show in general. Your
Yeah,
favorite human, right? As you like to say.
my favorite human.
And if you recall, a couple weeks now ago, we did part one of our deep dive into Artaud. Now we're going to continue. In that episode, we had looked at his mystical writings through a collection released by Infinity Land Press called New Revelations of Being.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic stuff. And that was Artaud just before he got put into a clinical institution, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to see Artaud in that period when we saw him go to Mexico, and he went through these shamanistic rituals, and we saw Artaud return and then get his staff of St. Patrick, and we saw him become this kind of prophetic figure as he travels to Ireland, talking about the end of the world. And then, that's where we kind of left off with Artaud, personally. And then in terms of his philosophy, we saw Artaud at that point was really getting heavily into this magical path of the magician. We saw him working with the tarot. We saw him talking about, translating this idea of the double that he talked about in his theatrical writings into this kind of magical thing, connecting it to the alchemical androgyne. Really wild stuff, right?
Very wild.
Like, what was your general takeaway of that new revolution of being, Graham?
So the new revelations of being is very much ended up not being, I guess, his prophecy of the destruction of the worlds, but of his world. And, shortly after writing it, he travels to Ireland. This doesn't end well. He's trying to enact the apocalypse by bringing the staff of St. Patrick back to its original place. And this causes some sort of confrontation with the police. He's ended up arrested and deported. And then through, again, some hearsay, there's a conflict on the boat with the crew. And he ends up being institutionalized for 9 consecutive years. And it's during this time, at the last of 5 asylums, he is subjected to electroshock 51 times, and loses all sense of himself in a way during this process. And he actually dies and is brought back to life miraculously. And has a death and rebirth experience, while in the asylums.
Right. Like, before we started, we were kind of talking about this briefly, and you had mentioned that Artaud sort of interpreted this as his like Christ moment, right? Where he writes this piece about Christ, and he saw this as his crucifixion, his death, and his rebirth, right? And we know too that even the Christian mysteries are connected to the Greek mysteries as well, and these more ancient rites. Like, there's some deep magic there in that imagery.
There is, and he gets very deep into it in that book, The True Story of Jesus Christ, which is a collection of 3 of his notebooks that he wrote, I think in 1946 and 1947. And really, it's a retelling of the Christian of the Christ myth, but he himself is Christ.
That's so interesting. So he had, like, we were talking about this last time, but he basically embodies his philosophy of this destruction of the self. He erases his name. He has this new magical prophecy of this destruction, and then he basically enacts it by going to Ireland, and then he spends this 9 years, such a magical number too, 9.
It
Those are
is.
people who are into numerology and like specifically like isopsophy or Pythagorean thought, it's just wild to me, right? And he goes through this death and this rebirth, and what does he come out of this? So how does he get out of the institution, and how do we find Artaud after this experience? What does this transform him into?
So I like to call this period of his life, this final period, Artaud the Sorcerer, because it is from here on in that he's not only talking about magic, he's embodying it into his daily life. He has this magical language that he's speaking in, and he has.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that, the magical language?
Yeah, so it's described by many as sort of like a type of glossolalia, and it's a very deliberate choice of syllables that he strings together and that he evokes kind of forcefully or incantatorily as a way to protect himself from sinister magic. And because he believed by this point that there were a group of initiates running society, essentially, and they were involved in sexual black magic that was confining him and silencing him.
That's so wild. This also reminds me again to just our talk we were having before we started, where he defined himself as this magical fool, right? And he went through this death and rebirth. It was because he was creating himself, right? Like he was going through this process of self-creation. And so the powers that be were out to get him because of that magic.
Exactly. And he speaks extensively about magic while he's in the asylums, to the point that in one of my books, I have a quote. Dr. Fridier, the one who administered or who oversaw the electroshock, said, "As long as you keep talking about magic, I'm going to keep giving you electroshock." And what does Artaud do? He digs his heels in and talks more about magic. Because magic is everything to him. He sees it in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to see more of this in the little bit of the writings as I peruse that you sent me. But, okay, so how does he wind up getting out of this institution? How does he prove to them that he's well? What is that story?
Right. So Arthur Adamov, a close friend of Artaud from before the asylums, he's a wonderful playwright in his own right, part of the Theater of the Absurd movement. Arthur Adamov organizes, along with some of Artaud's other friends, organizes a fundraising auction that featured writings and artworks from Sartre, Joyce, Picasso, Giacometti, and many other famous people. And the intent was to raise funds so that to pay for a convalescence clinic for him to live in, and so that he could have daily living expenses. If the Dr. Fridier would not release him unless he had some way of like monetarily providing for himself. And so the auction isn't held technically until after his release, but it's all set up and organized, and that's enough for Dr. Fridier to sign the release. And so Adamov reaches out to Paula Thevenet, who ends up being a very close friend and collaborator of Artaud, and she finds a suitable, affordable convalescence home called Ivry-sur-Seine, which is in just south of Paris, and is described by many as dilapidated, basically like a hellhole or like a war zone that you don't ever want to go to.
Oh, wow.
But it was always run by very left-leaning psychiatrists and doctors, and who were very compassionate, especially the doctor at this time, Dr. Achille Delma. He was very kind to Artaud. As soon as he came there, he welcomed him with open arms. He said, "Here are your keys. It's like to your own room." And quickly became aware of Artaud's use of magical gestures and and incantations. And so he provided a wooden block in his room that he could strike while reciting his poetry and magic with a cane that he has fashioned into the shape of a snake.
Oh, that's so cool. He had a snake cane that he would use to crack onto a piece of wood to cast magic.
Yeah.
But also an incredible doctor. Sorry, I'm I'm always interested in the rituals.
It's nice to see some compassion towards him finally after 9 years of strife and torment, And while he's wandering the grounds of Ivry-sur-Seine, he discovers an abandoned pavilion, which he believes was once occupied by the writer Gerard de Nerval. This, I don't think, is actually true, but Artaud believed this. And because of this, he wanted to move into the pavilion. And so Achille Delmas said, sure, why not? And organized for food and firewood to be brought out to this little pavilion every day. And this is important because after 9 years of living in communal wards and having no privacy at all, Artaud now had a private ideal workshop for writing and drawing and just living.
Yeah, amazing. His quality in life has improved 1,000%, basically.
Definitely. Unfortunately, by this time, he's also suspected to have been suffering from either intestinal or colon cancer. And at either rate, he would experience hemorrhages. And in a letter to a friend, he claimed that the staff found him, in his words, bathing in my own blood, a great pool of blood. So he is experiencing these hemorrhages, passing out from blood loss in his pavilion. And he is heavily relying on drugs at this point in his life. His friend Jacques Prével, the poet, would frequently scour the streets for him to search for heroin, opium, laudanum, chloral hydrate, anything he could get his hands on, basically. But Prével had tuberculosis and eventually became ill, forcing Artaud to venture out into Paris to procure his own drugs. And so he would go out into Paris to meet friends, but then also to pick up. And dealers would frequently show up at his pavilion to intimidate him into paying them. But he'd be like, "Listen, man, I have 20 francs. I've already explained this to them. You can take it or leave it, but this is all I have." And they would see how far gone he was with the drugs and with life, and they would leave him alone.
Wow! Oh my gosh! Wow.
So he's very depressed in a way. He's facing his own mortality. He's aware that he's going to die from cancer soon. He's taking large doses of chloral hydrate, which was a type of sedative. And he would take doses to the point that he would just collapse in the street unconscious. These nocturnal doses of chloral hydrate. And this is kind of setting up where he is in this point in his life. He's a man described in one of his final interviews in A Sinister Assassin as being a man awaiting but adamantly refusing death. So even in his final words, in his final months of life, he's writing about the perseverance of the body, the reconstruction of the body without organs as his theater of cruelty. And he's creating these magical spells to protect him and to curse his enemies.
Amazing. What wonderful stuff. So talk then about this collection, A Sinister Assassin.
Right.
So what are the writings at this time? Is Artaud writing to publish anything? What is this collection assembled from? Where are these writings coming from?
Right. So it's a variety of texts. 40 of them were taken from 40 pages of these texts were taken after his death from his notebooks by his close friend Paul Thevenin and a couple other friends, and they had these pieces published posthumously after his death in the magazine 84. And so A Sinister Assassin contains these texts for the first time in English. And it also has his texts, 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic, which are about drawings that he makes in his notebooks. We'll be reading that tonight. Mutu de Guri, which is another writing about the peyote ritual in Mexico. And his final notebook, which Stephen Barber reproduces in its entirety with all the same typography. And A Sinister Assassin also contains his last 2 interviews that he conducted before his death as well, which we won't be talking about here, but they are very striking, powerful interviews.
And he wound up compiling in his life like over 400 of these notebooks, right? How many was it again?
From 1945 to 1948, he wrote in 406 of these notebooks. They were like school children's cheap notebooks. They were very cheap for him to buy, I think, which is why he chose to write in them. And he started writing in them while he was in Rodez Asylum, or Rodez, and continues writing in these notebooks until his death. And he numbered each one of them and cataloged the contents of each of them.
Oh, wow.
And they're in a library archive in Paris, except for a few that have been stolen or lost over the years.
So is there anything else you want to say before we start to dive into the text?
I think that's all.
Okay.
So let's go to 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic.
Oh, sorry. Let's.
No worries. I think it's the 3rd slide is the start of the text. So in his notebook 396, he's titled it 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic. And it contains a body of text, as well as some text preceding and following it. So they included it all in its entirety here with these additional texts. This is the first of his 2 final texts that he works on in his life. And it would have been edited further. This was not a complete project. So he would have continued editing the text and then dictating it, as he always did. And it's a project that was proposed by the art curator Pierre Loeb, who exhibited Artaud's portraits in 1947. And this text refers to the drawings that he had been making in his notebooks, the sort of overlapping of writing and drawing, and these sort of magical signs that he would make in his notebooks. And he chose the notebooks that he wanted to take the drawings from, but he didn't choose the specific drawings. And so because of this, the project was never completed. But the text was published by Gallimard publisher in 2004.
That's so wild too. And I'm just like, I just want to talk to you about this title, 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic. The use of assassin and assassinate I find super interesting throughout all of this kind of stuff, because the roots of that word are in the Hashashin, right? Which is a mystical Shia sect of Islam that was famous for, doing a lot of kind of wild mystical rites and also for committing covert murders. So his use of this term is connecting him to a magical tradition. And it's also just this, that covert murder, right? That's the imagery he's invoking here and tying that to his magic. That's some sinister stuff, like you would say, a sinister assassin. Like it's just very dark magic here, Very
dark. And something important to note about this notebook, number 396, it was pierced through with a knife all the way through 11 times before he wrote in it. And we know that he did it before he wrote in it because he never writes in the incisions. He always writes around them and between them.
Right, so you know they were there. Oh, wow.
So let's start reading the text. Yes, magic exists. In fact, it's all that exists in this world that is fabricated by it and then lost by it. But for nothing in the world, it doesn't want that is known. That's why it gets people locked up like me. those who have sniffed out that thing, who have become aware and who talk about it in insane asylums. There exists, I don't know what kind of ceremonial magic with bangs and crashes by which you can rise up to the level of being able to see celestial life. But I'm not going to talk about that here. That offers no interest to me. Do you want to pause or should we keep going?
Yeah, we can pause for a second. Wow. Yes, magic exists. In fact, it's all that exists.
And this world was fabricated by it and lost by it. Quite the grand statement.
Such a grand statement. And it's beautiful. It's profound.
And he's aware that the
Go
magic doesn't want to be sniffed out. You know, it's supposed to be kept secret. And that's why it gets people locked up like him who have sniffed out that thing, who have become aware and who talk about it in insane asylums, right? It's like once you're aware of the magic, you're perceived as a madman or a fool.
It's so wild and self-fulfilling and prophetic. There exists, I don't know what kind of ceremonial magic with bangs and crashes. That makes me immediately think of the cult of Cybele and of Dionysus, which were famous for having drums and cymbals and the shaking of shields. And they would have these kind of parades and stuff. They do these things called the triambus, which are these victory songs to Dionysus. And it get wild. But yeah.
Just wild.
By which you can rise up to the level of being able to celestial life. I'm not. That offers no interest to me. And this
So
is just
he's not talking about ascendant, transcendent magic here. And
exactly. No, but I really want to highlight this point because this is something that we've seen with a lot of these dragons characters that we've been talking about, and it's also something that challenges the common conception of magic, because most magic, or at least the common perception, I should say, is this of ascending the holy mountain, right? Of taking that path of rejection of matter and of, you turn away from the nymphs, you undergo this castration, you ascend to the stars and are placed into the stars to be with the great mother or whatever, or to ascend and become like God, But Artaud here, he is rejecting that, and he had rejected that all throughout his earlier writings. Remember, we were talking about this?
Talks about descending into matter instead of rising out of it.
Exactly. He gazes into the abyss and he sees the nothing, and it terrifies him, and so he runs towards the matter, towards the light, and he's all about like going forward and progressing into it, right? His magic is one of this embracing of the unfolding of evolution of creation, and it's anything but a rejection of matter, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's continue.
He says, there's another magic with or without ceremony, but which acts. This magic, the ugliest, most sordid and vile magic that can be conceived of, is entirely based on the action of one man against another man, of one group against another group. And that's the only magic that I want to be concerned with here, because the world is dying from it. That's really it. And because we are dying from it, all of us, little by little, meanly and nastily.
Oh, wow. So we should definitely talk about this.
Yeah.
This magic, the ugliest, most sordid, the vile magic that can be conceived of, is entirely based on the action of one man against another, of one group against another. And that's the only magic that I want to be concerned with. So it's that violent act that he's anti, and he's identifying this as the culprit, the problem that needs to be eradicated. That's interesting.
He believes that this is him getting at, this is, his belief that there's this occult society that is conducting black magic to separate people from each other. Because if we're separated, we can be controlled.
And that's such an occult image in and of itself. Immediately, this all reminds me of the Oresteia, which we talked about on here. This idea of having to overcome these cycles of violence to rise above. You know, we saw the goddess Athena sacrifice part of her magic to transform the Furies into the Humanities, and just this idea, right, of like a creation of democracy and of courts in order to stop this cycle of revenge. And you're seeing that he's identifying that tit for tat, one man against another, one group against another. That's the same kind of violence, right? That the goddess Athena is trying to overcome, that she's trying to teach mankind to rise above from in the Oresteia. That's some interesting stuff there. And then that separation too makes me think of the mythology with after humanity is created by Prometheus, they originally exist as a two-souled, two beings in one form, both masculine and feminine, right? And
Right.
Zeus splits them in two, separating them eternally as a way to, like you said, to keep them down, to keep them from recognizing their godhood because they become too much like him.
Exactly.
Anyway, we know Artaud is into all of this, so it's just important, interesting to mention.
It's
right?
important to highlight, though. So everything that emerges from my paralytic fingers acts with a marvelous and rightful effectiveness. My contempt for doctors, for educators, for artists is necessary, but it's been lacking ever since I've exerted less rapidity, acrimony into it, having already been assassinated 2 times with that aim. It's getting very cold now, as one is Artaud the dead man who breathes. That evening, 1:30 in the morning, Afghanistan, Kabul above all, needs to be driven away with the exception of the one and only Nineka, depicted already 1,000 times. This action is bewitching, furious, implacable, atrocious, is not trying to deal with anything, neither is it preoccupied with anything. 50 drawings to assassinate magic. The text follows here.
Okay, whoa, we need to go back a bit here, but that's intense. Because the world is done. Okay, what was the last? Yeah.
Everything that emerges from my paralytic fingers is where we picked up.
Yeah, right. My contempt for doctors, educators, for artists is necessary. But it's been lacking ever since I've exerted less rapidity, acrimony into it, having already been assassinated 2 times with that aim. So someone is trying to prevent his criticism of the status quo, and he feels like people have already casted black magic against him.
Mm-hmm.
Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah. So he does describe in his adolescence or early adulthood, he describes an incident where he claims that a pimp stabbed him in the back. And that the pimp said, "It's not my fault. I've been compelled to do it."
Oh, wow.
And they've been controlled by magic to like assassinate him or to attempt to assassinate him. And I don't know if that's one of the having already been assassinated 2 times. I don't know if that's what he's referring to. He's definitely referring to his death in the asylum.
Right. And it's getting very cold now, as when it's Artaud the dead man who breathes. So he sees himself like has already been assassinated potentially by this magic.
Yeah, he sees himself as having died one time, having died already before. And this dead Artaud is like a double that follows him.
Right. You were talking about that with Momo, and this is an ongoing theme with the theater and its double. And again, it gets back to this magical imagery that we see in a lot of alchemy, where you have to merge with your double to become that transcendent rebus, that divine intersexed being, right? That perfected world soul or universal soul. Amazing stuff. Okay. So everything that everything half past 1 in the morning, Afghanistan, Kabul, above all, needs to be driven away with the exception of the one and only Nemeka. I'm trying to think of like what could he mean by Nemeka?
Yeah, I was trying to look up meaning of that word, and I was having trouble.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar offhand. If anyone in the chat has any idea about Nemeka, please send us a message. But that's still it's interesting kind of occulted language for sure. And
He's saying that only Nanekia needs to be, everything must be driven away from Afghanistan and Kabul except Nanekia. And I don't know if that's a being or if it's a place, or I'm not really sure.
right.
So then he's
Wild. Go ahead, sorry.
no, that's all right. So this is sort of the precursor to the actual text.
Okay. All right, so let's jump into the actual text then here. Okay.
50 times to assassinate magic.
Again, such a terrifying image, right?
I know.
Especially in our modern, like, our modern sensibilities, especially within a lot of pop magic, right? There's such an aversion to anything that would be considered black magic or curse magic. And Artaud is just full on like assassinate magic.
Yeah.
This is
a terrifying title.
Right? This is as dark as it gets, and this is not something that people are very open about in any way, shape, or form, So
no.
it's profound to see this. Okay.
So here it's not a matter of drawings in the strict sense of the word, of some kind of incorporation of reality through the drawing. They are not an experiment aiming at renewing the art, which I never believed in anyway, of drawing. No, but in order to understand them, first you have to be clear about them. These are 50 drawings taken from notebooks of literary, poetic, psychological, physiological, magical notes. Magical especially, magical first of all and above all. They are then interwoven with the pages, embedded upon the pages where the writing holds preeminence for vision, writing feverish noting, effervescent burning blasphemy, cursing from curse towards curse. These pages advance, and as bodies with a new sensibility, these drawings are there to comment on them, to give them air, and to illuminate them.
Wow. Okay, let's go back here.
Sure. So again, he's saying that these aren't drawings in the strict sense of the word, as he says. These are like magical symbols, magical images that he is creating in order to support the text within the notebooks.
Yeah, that's wild. So it says, in the strict sense of the word, some kind of incorporation of reality through the drawing. They are not an experiment aiming at renewing the art, which I never believed in any of drawing, no. But in order to understand them, first you have to be clear about them. There are 50 drawings taken from nifty books, right? Magical, okay.
Poetic, psychological, physiological, magical notes. Magical especially, and magical first of all and above all. So he's saying right from the get-go that these are magical texts that he's working with, and these are images to support these magical texts.
And this is really interesting because this connects him to a certain kind of magical tradition that we see. People who are engaged in things like the sortes, or in magical cut-ups and rearranging of texts, or recreation of texts. You see this a lot with where Artaud's coming out of that surrealist magic that's beginning right at that time, where Artaud is kind of, and he's a part of that scene. So it's interesting that you see this here. As I wonder what Artaud would make of like things like chaos magic and some of the stuff that comes later, because he's playing around with a lot of these images. But it's also important that we note that this idea of this sortitic type of magic we also see being done by people like what's his name, Boccaccio, but we also see it by Boccaccio's friend there who wrote the Secret. Oh my God, who wrote that? Sorry.
No worries.
It's Petrarch, So Petrarch, he always had like this red book that was made up of all these different like quotes, and he would be writing into it, and this was his divine connection to the muse, and he talks about it. Young later also has a red book that they're using,
Yeah.
and this idea of reassembling these magical texts to create new texts. It's a really profound, powerful kind of magic.
Wow. And he says here that this is curse magic, from curse towards curse, these pages advance and as bodies with a new sensibility.
Right.
So these are curses that he's giving physical form to. He's giving them bodies. So let's keep going. These are not drawings. They figure nothing, disfigure nothing, are not there in order to construct, build up, institute a world, even an abstract one. They are notes, words, supporting pillars because they're burning. Corrosive, incisive, spurted out from some kind of whirlwind of vitriol under the jaw, under the blade. They are there as though nailed down and destined not to move any further. So supporting pillars, but which are going to generate their own apocalypse because they've said too much to be born and too much in being born not to be reborn and to take on their body authentically then. But
whoa. So,
there.
Right. So he's doing this kind of sigil magic, but even more so than this kind of simple sigil magic, right? He's giving these magical creations life, like you said, body and form and will. And it's through this hate, through this vitriol, through this magical projected vitriol, and through the performance of the drawing, and then through this projection of them, he's giving them form and allowing them to exist within reality. They have a will unto themselves, they're going to exist. Like after they go out and assassinate whoever they're set to assassinate, they're still going to live and persist as a part of reality, as a living being. It's kind of wild, eh?
It's very wild.
I know I say that a lot, but this is him. He's creating what you call like an egregore, or a thought form, or an eidolon, right? In the Greek. Really wild.
Definitely, then. But all of that would be nothing if you had to just leave it there and not get out of the written page, subsequently illustrated by the light of these drawings, that is somehow flickering, which intends to say nothing and represents absolutely nothing. In order to understand these drawings in their entirety, you have to, 1, get out of the written page to enter into the real, but 2, get out of the real to enter into the surreal, the extra real, the beyond the real, the beyond the perceptible. That's what these drawings never cease to plunge into, because that's where they emerged from. And to understand that, in fact, they are nothing but the commentary of an action which has really taken place, and which the figuration upon paper delineates with a surge which has taken place and has generated its effects.
Whoa. Get out of the real to enter into the surreal.
So surrealist magic, literally.
Surrealist magic. And yeah, oh wow. This blending of reality and creation and imagination, and just this rejection of the real. That's such a interesting. Wow.
Very fascinating. I love, that's what these drawings never cease to plunge into, because that's where they emerged from. It's like these drawings are ceaselessly plunging into this extra real, this beyond the real, because they emerged from beyond the real, They came from like a primordial chaos, and that's where they returned to.
This is how Artaud's able to give birth to himself. This is how he's able to do magic. It's this connection, like you said. He's going into that place beyond the real, beyond matter and reality, being and non-being, and from there he's able to create form and give it life and project it into reality. Wow. And that's what he's doing with these drawings. These drawings are invoking life from that place beyond the real into our time, into the surreal, right? That blending of all of this.
Exactly.
Whoa.
So a surge which has taken place and has generated its effects magnetically and magically. And because these are not drawings, the representation or the figuration of an object, of a state of the head or the eye of an element, and of a psychological event, they are purely and simply the reproduction upon the paper of a magical gesture, which I've exerted into the true space with the breath of my lungs and my hands, with my head and my 2 feet, with my torso and my arteries, etc.
Whoa. It's a magical gesture which I have exerted into the true space with the breath of my lungs and my hands, with my head and my 2 feet and my torso. So the art is a projection of himself, right? He's giving it body because he has body. That is amazing too, right? It's this matter magic, Interesting.
It's fascinating stuff, and just the magical gesture which I've exerted into the true space. It's like that sums it up.
Right.
So then he says, when I write in general, I write my notes just at one stroke, but that's not enough for me. And I seek to prolong the action of what I've written in the atmosphere. So then I get to work. I search out consistencies, matches with the sounds, with the oscillations of the body and of the limbs, which will create an action, which will call upon the surrounding spaces to rise up and to speak. Then I get close to the written page. And so this is the end of a thought. He probably would have continued editing that there, but this is an unfinished piece. But
wow.
I've been forgetting to say that those consistencies have their meaning. I breathe out, I sing out, I make variations, but not just by chance. No, I always possess a kind of prodigious subject or a world to create and call up.
To create and call up your own world.
So he's talking about finding consistencies, matches with the sounds, He's finding oscillations of the body, finding resonances of words and of matter that will create a magical gesture or a magical incantation.
And this connects us again to this magical mystery tradition where we know that the song was at the heart of all of these rites. That's why Orpheus is the greatest of all the sages, because he had the magic in which he could make the dead come back to life. If only he didn't suffer from hubris and doubt. But still, that's wild stuff. He's connecting, you're right, himself to. He already talks about the cosmic movement, the gesture, the dance, and now it's that extended out into vibration, right? Which is the song. And he's connecting all of these energies into the breath as he sings out, into motion. Wow.
He always focuses a lot on breathing, even in his older texts, the power of the breath and of the scream. It's very fascinating. So he says, yes, I know the creative objective value of the breath that is something in the air. It's not only air that has been stirred up, it's an immense concretizing in the air, and which has to be felt within the body and through the body, as with the great amassing that is in itself atomic of elements and of limbs, which right at that moment makes up the drawing. A substance very, very far beyond that of barley sugar, and born right in that moment there instantaneously within the body. Electrical matter, which would be able to explain, if it was itself explicable, the nature of certain atomic gases, of certain atoms in a state of repulsion. I'm talking about atoms now, just as I can say a section of a wall, a volcano's interior surface, the molten artery of a volcano, a great wall of lava in movement towards an upending of what will become the immediate.
Whoa.
So he's
The
again,
volcano is such a powerful image, right? It's that
yeah,
blasting of the earth, it's that sexual release, it's that also that connection to these mountains, which is that great mother imagery. Oh wow, Great Wall of Lava. What were you going to say though, Graham? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
oh, that's all right. I was just going to point out that he's focusing again on the creative objective value of the breath, and how if you breathe in a certain way, you can instill life. You know?
Yeah, right. And this mastery of the body, right? This is something that's really important too, because a lot of magic, or a lot of people's perception of 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 magic, and there is a type of magic that does this, but it's not the only one. It's that rejection of the material, rejection of the body, right? And this disconnection from the self, and this fixation upon the mind. Whereas everything that Artaud does is an affirmation of the body, and this being in this totality of being, and connecting to the individual parts and then bringing them together as a whole. And this is such an ongoing theme with him. And this utilizing this image of the body and transforming it as that act of magical creation, right? It makes up the drawing. Is his body is a, the drawing is a recreation of the body. It's an expression of the body, right?
Exactly. He's always talking about, the body without organs, and how the theater of cruelty is the creation, the putting into place of the body without organs, the reconstruction of anatomy into like a magical divine being.
Right. I also wanted, I love this. Atoms in a state of repulsion. I'm talking about atoms now, just as I can say a section of a wall, a volcano's interior surface, the molten artery of a volcano, a great wall of lava in movement towards an upending of what will become the immediate. So this is this crazy thing where you're imagining the very atoms in the structure of our physical reality, the things that make us up, as this molten fiery lava, not as this strong structured material, but seeing it as these things in this chaotic flow, that in this projective, energetic, powerful flow, right? But that's a rejection of what we normally think in our minds and our perception. We like to see our bodies as these solid objects, this something that's slowly changing to the point of where it's nearly imperceptible, right?
Mm-hmm. So then he says, so my drawings reproduce these forms that are made apparent by them, these worlds of prodigies, these objects by which the way is established. And what used to be called the great alchemical work is from now onwards pulverized, because we are no longer involved in chemistry, but instead in nature. And I really believe that nature itself is going to speak out.
Oh, wow. Call out, shots fired from Antonin Artaud. And this was in the 31st of January, 1948.
Yeah, that's the date he gives for this text.
Well,
and then there's a little text that follows it as well. But I don't know if you want to talk about this last little bit first. These
yeah.
objects by which the way is established. I think, I don't know if you talk about the magnum opus here in alchemy, or
I'm getting all of that because look, he says, he comes out and he goes, and what was used to be called the great alchemical work, obviously the magnum opus, is from now onwards pulverized, right? So you cannot undergo that process in the old tradition, because we are no longer involved in chemistry, but instead in nature. And I really believe that nature itself is going to speak out. And it's seemingly he's again addressing in his poetic way this idea of this humanism that's a central issue that Artaud has, where the fact that we have rejected the natural world and we have separated ourselves out from nature and we have abused nature and we have used it as an object, something to be objectified and otherized. And because we have done this profound, separation, it's going to speak out in his terms, it's going to fight back against us. And because of this, we can't, the old method, this makes me again think of like Gast.
Yeah.
Because the old methods, the old artistic ways are no longer possible. I think that's what he's getting at. The great alchemical work cannot be achieved in our current poisoned world.
We have to find a new way to connect with nature and to connect with ourselves.
Right? We have to recreate this because the relationship to nature is different, because we have abused it so much, and we have to work at that healing. We're in a different process, a different state. We need to act in a different way. Anyway.
Exactly. It's just wild stuff.
I love it so much.
And now we have just one little page following 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic. He says, the meeting of the Tower of Babel with the Tower of Pisa 50,000 centuries later. Ibi Kayar Kaman Ta Ima Aman Ta Ima Ima Natar.
Do we know what that means? Oh, that's his magic language? Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't know what that means.
We don't know what that means. It's probably very personal to him. I'm guessing it's a spell that he's casting.
Yeah, almost certainly. The meeting of the Tower of Babel with the Tower of Pisa, 50,000 centuries later. What do you think he means of that?
Maybe
the collapse of Europe in the same way that we saw the collapse of Babylon? Is he talking about the fall of European society? Sorry.
I think that's what he's hinting at, yeah.
Wow. Well, they managed to stop the tower from leaning, right? And they're slowly they came up with this ingenious method where it's going to slowly right itself with the natural flow of nature as they slowly inch it back. I wonder what Artaud would think about that.
Right?
The Tower of Pisa is never going to collapse. We fixed it. Anyway, it's just interesting. But the metaphor is important that he's making here still, right? This idea that we're going to see we saw the fall of the Tower of Babel. We're going to see, could we also see, that resulted in the fall of those early civilizations, those Mesopotamian empires, the end of that cultural dominance. And I think what he's trying to allude is to that Europe could suffer a similar fate where its cultural dominance is no longer a reality, right?
Exactly. So now we come to the New Tudeguri. And this is his final text major text that he completed before the end of his life. And it was composed presumably with haste within the confines of a letter that he wrote February 16th, 1948 to the publisher known as K. Now, K were going to release all the texts of To Have Done with the Judgment of God, which was his radio broadcast that was banned.
Talk about this for a second.
Yeah.
What is this radio broadcast about?
So To Have Done with the Judgment of God is a radio broadcast that he composed that talks about recreation of corporeal anatomy, and there's hints, there's a text about the Tudeguri ritual. There's lots of texts about within it it's about the putting into place of the body without organs. as a fleshing out of this concept. And it was supposed to be what he felt to be a true performance of theater of cruelty. And he was very dismayed when this performance was decided to be banned due to its perceived obscenity and
I
blasphemy.
remember you sent me recordings of this that he actually recorded. Some of them have survived, even though they never aired.
Yeah, they recorded the entire production, and you can listen to it online now. And it's a powerful, powerful piece. And so, because it was banned, he talked to the publisher Kay about releasing all of the texts as a standalone. Now, unfortunately, one of these texts, To Degree, The Right of the Black Sun, was promised by Artaud to the publisher Marc Barbazat, who published all of Artaud's writings about his experiences with the Tarahumara people. And so he had to provide a new text. And so he wrote the new To Degree in its stead in this letter. And was like, so basically he's like, you can publish to them with the judgment of God, but you can't use this one section from it. Instead, use this section. Because he promised the works to too many people.
Wild stuff. I love it. Hey, whatever you need to do to get paid, Artaud, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And so, To Degree is like a retelling of the creation myth in the Tarahumara people. And it's the peyote ritual as well. And it has to do with the sun, and it's typically performed at the beginning of sunrise and is completed when the sun is fully risen. So let's get into the text here.
Yeah, let's hear all about this. I'm excited.
It's pretty wild. To Degree is a black ritual performed for the external glory of the sun. It's the ritual of the black night and of the eternal death of the sun. No, the sun is not going to be coming back. And in reality, the 6 crosses forming the circle to be traversed by the celestial body are there solely to bar the sun's way, because we don't know enough. We know nothing about this here in Europe, about how the cross is a black sign. We don't know enough about the salivating power of the cross, and about how the cross forms an ejecting of saliva exerted over words of thought. In Mexico, the cross and the sun belong together, and the leaping sun is this turning sentence which takes place 6 times before it reveals itself. So the cross.
For a second.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, just because this imagery, this idea of he's connecting the Christian cross with the sign of evil. And I think he's hinting at this. Also, he's saying that the sun and the cross are connected. Well, we know that the cross is generally either representative of the sword or the phallus, right? And the sun is usually representative of that cosmic womb, especially the black sun, right? It's that abundancy of creation, that expelling of creation. Sometimes it's even a solar anus, you know, because there's just so much material, you know, as like George Bataille would talk about. And it's just a wild, powerful image, you know. And in Mexico, the cross and the sun belong together, and the leaping of the sun is this turning sentence which takes place 6 times before it reveals itself.
So he is hinting here a bit about the actual ritual, which is that there would be 6 men laying on the ground strapped to crosses, and at a certain point he describes in the ritual, they jump up and they have to hop around in a circle, and they have to complete this circle 6 times or else the ritual will not be properly initiated.
Interesting. And I think that has to do with probably some kind of celestial bodies or something going on here with these, you know, with
he brings in the number 7. The 7 is a very important number, which we'll see later on.
Wow. Anyway, continue.
So the cross is a heinous sign, and it has to be that its matter burns. Why heinous? It's because the tongue engaged in salivating the sign is a heinous one. And why is it salivating the sign? In order to anoint it. No saintly sacred sign can exist if it hasn't been anointed.
Anointed. And again, this connects to this idea of this connection between the sun and the cross, the anointing. What is the sacred anointing oil, the anointing liquid, right? And the oldest mysteries, it's the sexual fluid. You know, it's that divine ejaculate of the priestess, right?
Right.
And the porneia, right? That they would collect in the tripods. So that's some wild stuff, right? And he's pointing to this, right?
He is. And then he says, but isn't the tongue at the moment of that anointing itself stuck out into a point? Isn't it positioning itself between the four cardinal points? So as the sun appears, it needs to jump over the 6 points of the heinous sentence to be saved, for which it generates a kind of translation in the form of lightning. Because the sun really appears right at the base of the crosses as though as a ball of lightning. And that lightning is never going to grant forgiveness. What is it never going to forgive? The sins of the people and of the surrounding village. And it's for that reason that for several weeks before the ritual, you can see the Tarahumara people engaged in purifying themselves and dressing in clean white clothes. And now the day of the ritual with this lightning striking apparitions is finally here. It's then that 6 men dressed in their white clothes, the 6 men considered to be the purest of the tribe, are positioned right at ground level. And each of them is supposed to have become wedded to a cross.
Okay, let's pause again for a second here, because this is such a wild image that we're setting up with this ball of lightning and the lightning. Automatically, always I think of like Zeus or Thor, those masculine lightning gods, those central authorities, that aether, that power to transform and create life, right? It's often also connected to the magic of the mushroom, right? And it's this terrifying thing that, and he's saying, which was wild too, is like it doesn't grant forgiveness. This immediately connects it to the Western kind of traditions, right? Because so much of the Western tradition is about getting that war god to forgive itself. And what does it require in Christianity? It requires the sacrifice of itself to itself. It's the only way that forgiveness can be bestowed upon such an angry, hateful entity, And I think it's just wild for all that to be connected,
Yeah, I think he's definitely projecting some of his own interpretations into the myth.
Of course.
But it's an interesting syncretic accumulation of all these ideas.
Well, you can clearly see where his Christian kind of angry Old Testament God who gets transformed by the New Testament, Jesus is coming in, right?
Yeah. So one of the crosses is made of 2 sticks tied together with a filthy cord. And there's a 7th man standing there, holding a cross against himself attached to his thigh, with between his hands an instrument to make outlandish music, made of an accumulation of wooden slats, one on top of the other, and which gives out a sound somewhere between a bell and a cannon. And so on a certain day at sunrise, the 7th Tutuguri initiates the dance by beating on one of the slats with a deep black cast iron hammer. Then you see the men with their crosses shoot up as though directly out of the earth, advancing while hopping to form a circle, and each of them has to manifest his cross 7 times without at any point breaking the intact circle. I don't know if it's because the wind is rising now, or if a wind has risen from that music from another time which is still persisting today. But you feel as though whipped by a gust from the night, by a breath of air that's risen up out of the vaults of an abolished humanity and which came to show its face here. A face which is painted, a figure that is grinning and merciless.
Whoa. And again, that this merciless, masculine, powerful deity is associated with the lightning and with the wind, with the air. This is exactly the same kind of depiction of Zeus that we see in the Greek traditions. Zeus is the aether, right? He is the lightning. He has that's the weapon that he wields, and he is this merciless god who only does whatever he wants. Whoa, that's wild. And again, it connects to the Christian traditions as well, which come a bit later, but are similar. This idea of this powerful, masculine, tyrannical deity, this force, but it comes as the wind.
Mhm. And is summoned almost by the bell cannon, the hammering of this wooden instrument.
Right. Yeah, the hammering is so important too, right? We have this ritual too oh wow, yeah. And that because the hammer and the club is something we often see that is associated with these kinds of deities, these figures, like Hercules or Thor, um, or like Hephaestus. Wow, interesting.
So merciless because the justice it's bringing isn't of this world here. Be pure and chaste, it seems to be saying. Be virginal too, or else I'll be unleashing my Gehenna upon you. And Gehenna is starting to unleash itself too. The seventh Tudegurius cacophony has taken on an atrocious propulsion, as the crater of a volcano bursting into its eruption. The wooden slats seem to be breaking under the noise as though they were a forest devastated by blows wielded by some ferocious woodcutter. And then what you had been expecting suddenly happens. Fumes that are sulphurous and lilac colored emerge as a mass from a point in the circle traced by the six men, and which the six crosses have sealed shut. And from under those fumes, a flame, an immense flame, is illuminated suddenly, and that immense flame is now seething. It's seething with a noise that is unheard of. Its interior fills up with stars and incandescent corpuscles. It's as though the arrival of the sun has brought with it a celestial system. And now you can see that the sun has taken its rightful position. It has manifested itself in the middle of the celestial system.
That is so wild because this connects so much to a lot of the theurgy magic that we see in the Greek tradition, and also like a lot of this grimoire magic where you're setting up a magical circle, you're recreating the stars above in order to draw down the stars below into the fire so that you can directly commune with the spirit. That's some transformative magic right there. This Tudaguri ritual, they're drawing down the stars.
Yeah. And a big part of the peyote ritual is about consuming the peyote is like a divine plant, right? And by consuming it, you invite the divine into you or you become the divine.
Right.
And so it's literally drawing down the stars in this ritual. So
Beautiful.
So it's next page. It's positioned itself immediately, as though at the very center, in an amazing outbursting. Because the flaming corpuscles, as with the soldiers of an army engaged in warfare, have thrown themselves one onto the other while bursting. And now the sun has become round, and you can see an igneous ball in the axis itself of the natural sun since its sunrise, a ball that rises up and jumps from cross to cross. The six men have now opened their arms, not in order to signify the cross, but with their hands outstretched as though they wanted to receive that ball. And that ball is turning around each of the crosses and planted in the earth in a perpetual act of refusal. Because the cacophony is a wind, it's now become as though it were the base of a wind through which an army could very well advance forward. And in effect, there is at the borders of noise and of the void, because the noise is now so strong that the void is all that it calls up in advance of itself.
Oh, wow. This is wild because now this is starting to appear like a fertility rite. This merging of the cross and the sun, this a way to bring life to the plants, to create this resurrection. It's making me think of some of the stuff we see with Demeter in the core in the rites of Eleusis. This kind of sexual union, right? The sun does not want to merge with the cross, and the men are like forcing it. So now you're having this violation, right? And it's usually this kind of either this sexual rape or this violation or this taboo breaking, this violent act that is at the heart of a lot of this magical copulation and fertility rites. Like we see Demeter is abducted by Hades and she's taken to the underworld, and then her mother has to go through these purification rites in order to get her to come back and to bring the spring. you know?
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating stuff. And then he says, the noise is now so strong that the void is all that it calls up in advance of itself. I love that imagery of this, the pounding of this, the frantic pounding of this musical instrument is the, calling up chaos, the void.
Right. And it's that panic stricken charge, right? Again, the Pan, we got to remember panic, right? Pan brings the panic, that experience of the all, that experience, that drug experience, that magical right experience that destroys one's ego and brings an ego death, in a sense, as you're lost within this experience of the totality of the everything. And the rhythm of an army on the march, punctuated by the gallop of a panic stricken charge. The ball of fire has burned up the 6 crosses. Right? Like wild fucking stuff. Such a beautiful piece. Sorry though, you can keep going.
Sure. So the ball of fire has burnt up the 6 crosses. The 6 men with their arms outstretched and who have seen that thing arrive are now all 6 of them exhausted and drooling. And the noise of it galloping is at a maddening point. And you can see on the horizon above the crosses a kind of enraged horse which is advancing with a naked man upon it, because the rhythm's beating was 7, but there are only 6 crosses. And in the wood-driven cacophony of the 7th Tutaguri, there's still an introduction of nothingness. There's still this introduction of nothingness, this time hollowed out. A time that is hollowed out, a kind of exhausting voiding between the blades of wood that cut. Nothingness that calls up the torso of the man, the body of the man cut into segments in the fury, no, in the fervor of the things of the interior. There were underneath the void the noise of a great bells in the wind, the tearing apart of marine guns, the wailing of waves in the hot southern windstorms choose their places. Now to cut it short, the horse in advancing carries upon itself the torso of a naked man who is brandishing not a cross, but a stave of wood and iron attached to a gigantic horseshoe, through which his entire body passes, his body marked with a gash of blood. And the horseshoe is right there like the clamping jaws of a straitjacket, in which the man is caught at the gash of his blood.
That is so wild. Oh man, there's so much crazy imagery going on here.
Yeah. So something about, I love how he says the rhythm's beating was 7, but there were only 6 crosses. And in his other piece, Tutaguri, The Rite of the Black Sun, he describes this man on the horse as the 7th sun, but the horse itself is the sun and not the man on the horse.
There's a lot of this magic. Are you familiar with the 7 sisters of astrology?
No, I'm not
the
familiar
Pleiades?
with astrology.
So you don't know what the Pleiades are?
Not in depth, no.
Okay, so there are 7 magical stars. One of the most important. A lot of the most ancient myths that we have are related to this, because 6 of the stars are always visible, but the 7th star goes through periods of visibility and invisibility. And often there are stories about how during the time when this 7th star is not appearing, it is upon the earth, or it is, it is in another area. And then there's all of these rites about having to do this, right? So when you have only 6 and then 7 appear, I immediately think to the Pleiades, because that is something that is such a universal image, and most of these ancient cultures would be aware of the invisible yet visible 7th star,
That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
So I think a lot of this probably, especially since it's related to one of these ancient cultures, in Mesoamerica, it probably does have an astrological connection of some kind.
Definitely. And I think that it's important too because like the six crosses are going through the circle. They're jumping in the circle. They're creating and then the instrument calls up the seventh Tutuguri or the seventh sun, which is or the seventh cross, which is like almost like a destruction or like a finality of the ritual. And it's like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
100%, 100% makes sense, you know. And I love this imagery too because it relates to a lot of the tarot we see, where he's talking about the naked man on the horse. This is something we see in a lot of tarot and related magical imagery, usually some kind of analog for a savior figure or the magician, or sometimes a Christ type figure. You know, Christ is often seen riding upon the donkey coming into Jerusalem, you know. But what is Christ really? He's that salvation, the dying and rising vine. He's that Dionysian energy, you know. And that's what he's representative of, is this death and rebirth that we're seeing with this fertility rite that's going on, right? They're drawing down the stars in order to facilitate this rebirth, this bringing back of it again, you know. And I wanted to talk about too this really amazing imagery here where he's talking about that calls up the torso of the man, the body of the man cut into segments, in the fury, no, in the fervor of the things of the interior. There, where underneath the void, the noise of the great bells and the winds, the tearing apart of marine guns, the wailing of waves in the southern windstorm. This, to me, this is serious magical imagery because that screams the story of the Purusha, the Prajapati that we see in Indian myth, or Indian, traditions, where you have that primordial person who's torn apart as that initial sacrifice, and then his body becomes the unfolding of creation. Wow. Or you see that with the divine Phanes in the Greek tradition, where Phanes rips himself apart to know because of that eros, that lusting, and so he tears himself into two and becomes the twins. So there's a lot of this connection to this magical unfolding, right? And that tearing apart image is so profound within the Maenad rites and the rites of Dionysus. Dionysus is ripped apart by the Titans. The Maenads rip apart Pentheus. The Maenads rip apart Orpheus. There's this constant, to perceive this monstrous feminine energy, this perfection, and to be destroyed by it.
And I know that Artaud was aware of this dismemberment imagery because in his Alfred Jarry theater, which was a precursor to the theater of cruelty, they would dismember mannequins on stage. And then the dismemberment was the act of cruelty that they were...
Sure. He's so very much aware of this from all of these connections, because we already know he knows a lot of this Eastern philosophy and the Indian traditions, and that he is deeply aware of the alchemical tradition and of this rebus. And so much of this understanding, it's about the reformulating of the cosmic person, right? You have to heal the wounds of creation. So you want to reassemble, break, you're trying to heal the dismembered Titan. You're trying to re-embody that original man, right? This is the magic of Artaud, what he's getting at. Why? Because he creates. When he's talking about the body and being that person, he's not just simply saying his own individual self. He's talking about that alchemical, divine, cosmic being that is the totality of creation. So when he embodies that person, he can command with authority all of reality, because he is reality. His will is supreme. And it's this magic they're trying to destroy him for,
Exactly. So that concludes the new Tutuguri. I don't know if there's any more you want to talk about with it.
I think also I just wanted to mention the horseshoe imagery, because the horseshoe imagery and the going into the horseshoe, this is something like for people who also watch the show I do, Occult Explorers with Dion. They'll recognize that horseshoe image as something incredibly occulted. And it has to do with the Dark Harbor, which is the womb, the cosmic womb of creation. And it also has to do with the taking of these of drugs that were processed through the animals. But the horseshoe image is something that they would use on everything, right? It was the shape of their theater. It was the shape of where they would do the threshing on the grain floor. It's a very magical image. So when you see that horseshoe or the horse hoof specifically referenced, they're almost always referring to magical rites.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like the clamping jaws of a straitjacket in which the man is caught at the gash of his blood. Such a powerful image.
Right. And again, it just makes me think too, right? He's calling us to break free of the real and into the surreal. He's very much in this platonic kind of mode where he sees us enforced and trapped in these straitjackets, and we're lashing out at ourselves, and we need to wake up and perceive reality for what it is through this lens of the surreal, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Wild stuff.
Just wild. So now we come to Artaud's last notebook. So a bit of context here. This is number 406 of the notebooks that he began writing in from 1945 to 1948 while at Rodez and then in Ivry-sur-Seine. And these are all held at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And I have an interesting anecdote here from Stephen Barber. He says, there is some kind of exceptional ritual at stake whenever the archivists are asked to bring out the last notebook of all, from the drawer's extreme end, as though its green cover held or embodied some kind of forensic evidence from which the residues of Artaud's death, an act of diabolical, magical, or social assassination, or an amalgam of all three for him, can be investigated and exposed.
Wow.
He then says, on winter days, unless I was hallucinating it, some of the notebooks, once their pages had been opened, still gave off a compacted smell of cigarette and wood smoke, coal, damp, invoking the Paris streets and cafes of 1948, or the interior of the Ivry-sur-Seine pavilion, even the smell of Artaud's coat pockets interiors, or his body.
So with this last notebook, did he ever finish it before he passed away?
He did not. He filled in 22 pages. And he passed away either the night of the 3rd of March or the morning of the 4th of March, 1948, from a chloral hydrate overdose. And it was presumed that it was not an intentional overdose because we know that he was prone to taking extremely large doses of this drug. And the way that he was found on the floor with his shoe in his hand, as if he was like getting dressed.
Right.
And so it was probably he took a huge dose of it, started getting dressed, and then collapsed and died.
It's that hubris, right, of the psychonaut. This is something that we see with a lot of these magician type characters where, they've been so successful with these high doses for so long that they believe they're impervious and they become reckless. And that's unfortunate to hear that story. But
it's very sad. And so we have here the first 22 pages of his last notebook with all the typography perfectly or as accurately represented as possible.
Interesting. I like that they do that.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. So written on the notebook's cover is this: the execration of the inborn magician. Now, to execrate is like to curse or to curse or denounce something. So he's cursing. So it's the cursing or denouncing of the inborn magician is what we have here.
Okay, what is he getting at with that?
So, yes, you've asked me nothing, and nobody on this subject matter has ever asked me anything. everybody sticks to their own thing, knowing all too well without any doubt what they need to hang on to. So I'll say this: yes, magic exists. And you may well not even know to what extent it has always existed. It exists just as the vault of the nocturnal firmament exists, as a rosary's unending succession of beads exists, because far more so than religion itself, magic has always existed.
Wow, let's pause there. You sent this to me, and I had to share this because it was just such a beautiful sentiment, and so much magic to behold here. Like, so I'll say this: magic exists.
And he's referring, he's connecting magic to the nocturnal firmament, to the cosmic womb, and he is pointing out that religion draws on magic. And religion itself is a form of magic, but there's a more profound primordial magic that has existed for all time.
Right. And I love this imagery. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying it exists outside of time even as well.
Right. And it's interesting that he chooses that imagery of the rosary, because the rosary, enchanting upon the rosary, is all about dividing time and counting time. Right. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, too, though, the rosary, you finish where you started, right? But it's interesting. I love it. But yeah, you're right. The connection to the nocturnal firmament, that cosmic womb, that ex nihilo, right? That chaos gap from which creation is born. Yeah. Wow.
So then he says, here and there, religion is the putting into practice of an archaic ritual that has now more or less lapsed. But magic, that is a fact, a sinister one perhaps, but a fact. Without any ceremonial or any ritual, without any practices of theurgy that have become frozen, magic exists as though it were the sweeping wind of a fact which has never stopped wiping out everything.
Wow.
Then he has some more of his magic language here. Fantai, Atanoch, and Mai, now hardened, Orak, Akumf, Funchi.
Wow. Let's just go back here for a second where he was talking about this idea about religion, right? Because what does religion really mean? To bind. It's about that disciplined action. It's not about true spirituality. And this is what Artaud is identifying. Here and there, religion is the putting into practice of an archaic ritual that is now more or less lapsed. So even if this thing did have magic, its magic is no longer to be ceased to be relevant, right? There's this acknowledged, because of the continued progression of time and this disconnection, and the fact that you've disciplined it and ritualized it. You've taken away the spontaneity. You've taken away that flame, that creativity, that the magic, excuse me, of creation, of projecting into the future. Instead of projecting into the future, you're just tying yourself to the past. Anyway, it's beautiful.
Well said.
Without any ceremonial or without any ritual, without any pact or theurgy,
Magic exists as though it were the sweeping wind of a fact which has never stopped wiping out everything. So he recognizes that magic, the world is created by magic and destroyed by magic.
It's also this force that is coming to wipe out everything. That connects us to that dark feminine magic again, right? That Lady Babylon that the Christians are so terrified of. This cosmic force of creation that drives everything forward in this mad, chaotic frenzy of sex and violence. Reality is brutal, but it's also, there's also love in reality.
There is. So some more magic language. Omono zet o kano z. The sonic tissue of the radio broadcast. Thursday, 4th of March, 1948, 11:30 in the morning. Bernard Amaru. So Bernard Amadou was the editor for K Publishing Company. They were gonna publish all of To Have Done with the Judgment of God, the texts, and he was scheduled to meet with Artaud the morning of the 4th of March, 1948. But he arrived at the pavilion just after Artaud's body had been found, so it was too late.
Wow. So he had written this down. Okay, interesting.
So the sonic tissue of the radio broadcast. I love that. It's like the flesh of this performance. You know, it's still
That's what
persistent.
he was putting onto the page. What he was going to give to this Bernard character. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, that's wild.
Then
Sonic.
the sonic tissue of the radio broadcast. Yeah, I love that so much. It's like the performance itself has an existence, has a flesh, has a body.
Yeah. And just like his art pieces, right? He's giving birth to these new forms of creation out of himself. That's his magic, you know?
So then he says, on the mountain slopes of Fortinbras, those of Norway, those of the world. I don't really know what he's implying here. A lot of these are just sort of fragments of thoughts that he's written down. But it's interesting. What do you make?
When I think about on tops of the mountains, right? Just this ascending to those magical heights, right? And going to like in you know, in Norway and stuff, you're ascending to that you know, to that divine realm of like the Hyperborean, you know, kind of magic of ascension. I just get this imagery of him, you know, being like, from the top of the world, I'm going down into creation. You know, like this reminds me of his magic where he was going about reversing the flipping of the poles with like the tarot and his astrology, you know, where it's like, yeah, I've been to the top of the mountain. I could just be this, you know, respected artistic figure, but I'm choosing to dive back down the slopes, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, it's a fragment.
It is a fragment. Next, he says, the question that counts is that of the eye in movement to you while passing through the arcades over the main beam's intercrossings. So again, a fragment here, but the movement of the eye, that of the eye and movement to you while passing through the arcades is kind of like an infernal movement, maybe, or a magical movement.
It makes me think of his magical gestures for sure, but I also get back to that image of the primordial violence and of the atomic violence that he was talking about, and this relationship of the one to the other, and the fact that we need to come into this dance of harmony, right? We need to learn how to harmonize and not crash into each other. And that's, I think, such an essential part of this. You know, he's getting to this intercrossing where there's going to be this moment where we're going to cross. And the question is how do we behave? Do we cross peacefully or do we come to fisticuffs here? You know?
So the next page is just a drawing without any text. I just included it here so to give people an idea of what the drawings in his notebooks kind of looked like. We can see a figure here and maybe with their hand towards their face, and they might be involved in some sort of invocation or a curse. We can see these things floating around him. Maybe the sinister assassins that he's referring to with his black magic. I'm not really sure, but it's a striking image nonetheless.
Right. Wow.
So the 9th page says, it's a drawing with a text, and it says, which will no longer exist soon. And if we go to the next page, we can see the drawing. Very wild stuff, these drawings. They're very barbaric almost, and like they're, you know, he's using such force that his pencils break when he's drawing. And you can see the raw passion in it, I think.
Yes, you can see it's drawn with emotion and with anger and fury, right?
Mhm.
And there's almost this raw visceralness to it in its simplicity, almost a childlike kind of it's almost like a childlike release, right? It's about releasing of energy more than a creation of any kind of image.
Exactly. And he says, which will no longer exist soon. What's he referring to? Magic himself? The world?
Well, yeah, right.
We don't know. But
Or
it's
the sun. Remember, he was talking. It makes me think of in the Tutaguri thing, where he's talking about how the sun is never going to come back. Eventually, it's just going to stop turning. Which is,
fascinating stuff.
yeah.
So then we have another drawing. This is on page 10 of the notebook, and it almost seems like funeral bodies or something, like corpses stacked together, or maybe people acting in a sexual act. He does talk a lot about black sexual magic.
I keep thinking of cigarettes. You know,
It's too, yeah, he did like his cigarettes.
and you use them in his magic. I remember you showed in the first ever
Yeah,
talk we did. He had the magic where he would burn cigarette holes into the letter, and he sent the letter to like a landlady of his or something.
yeah, he would send them to all sorts of people. And he would always, yeah, he would strike them through with his cigarette, burn through them to seal them.
Wild stuff. But yeah, who knows? It's interesting figures nonetheless. It could be all of this, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I wish I could pick his brain a little bit about that.
Right?
So next, two fingers up against the forehead, the forefinger and the middle finger. Two fingers against the chest, the middle finger and the forefinger. Comprise the action able to push away the evil of those low down agitators. And I'm going to be remembering that. As for the sign that I'm going to accomplish in order to recognize myself for myself, that's never had anything to do with anyone except myself. Because beyond the rare individuals that I've chosen, because I myself made them, I am the universal enemy of all men, having moreover spiked all of them down.
Again, this is that idea, right? He has become the universal world soul, and as such, he gets to dictate creation to the rest of us. So all of those, he's the ultimate patriarch, that masculine figure. So all the other men are out to get him.
Yeah. Then he often talks about rebirthing. He talks about his daughters of the heart quite often in his later writing, where he adopts his friends like Paul Thevenet and a few others as like these daughters, and it's almost like daughters born out of him. Like he's a progenitor as well as a patriarch, you know. And
Right.
very interesting. And there's two fingers against the forehead, the two fingers against the chest. This is like a magical sign to repel evil spirits away.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. I have to remember that. He says, I have to remember this. So we definitely need to remember
Yeah, he even says it.
this. Interesting.
So let's keep going.
Yeah.
Magic, low down operating magic that works to dismantle the body's masonry and to propel it downwards exists. In the mind, that's what it says, and in principle, but never as a fact. Magic which melts the body down into a mind and into a principle, which makes of the body this spurt of baby's way, this dripping of milk that is isolated somewhere within the entire body's movement, within the gate of its entire masonry.
Whoa. Again, it's propelling it downward, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
trying to find that magic, not again of ascension. He's not climbing the holy mountain. He's trying to ascend into matter or descend, sorry, into matter. In the
Descendants.
mind, what it says, this is as in principle, but never as fact. Magic which melts the body down into a mind and into a principle, which makes of the body this spurt of baby's way. So you're becoming that milk, right? The mother's milk, the milk of creation. And it's isolated somewhere entire in the entire body's movement within the gate of its entire masonry. What do you think he means by this image of the masonry and the
I think
construction of the body?
He's talking about its inherent original structure, the body's original structure, and how that needs to be deconstructed and rebuilt. We have to dismantle the body so that it can be brought back together again in its true form, I think is what he's talking about. I think this is his body without organs that he's referring to again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and this idea of the Mason as the reassembling again, right? You're reassembling this cosmic person that's been torn apart. Oh wow. Interesting stuff.
Very interesting. So we have some more magical language. Kondiar, O Neter, Sor, Pair, Kondiar, O Neter, Se. And like, it's interesting. I'd love to see how he actually says a lot of this, like in real life, like as he's dictating these works to people. Because he does do a bit of this incantation and to have done with the judgment of God, and it's quite terrifying to listen to. I can't really do it justice, but
Yeah, go check that out on YouTube. Also, Graham did do a reading of the Judgment of God, and we have that up on the channel in English. But you should also just listen to him in the original French, even if you don't understand it, just so you can hear the intensity of this man, because it's next level. Artaud is next level.
Yeah, so passionate.
Right?
So now it says, and I was waking up, propelled low down with the criminals, through the lowest jealousy, through hatred, and through desire, who activated evil 100 times over with a greater and greater degree of consciousness and of science, who undertook that with a consciousness and a science that were more and more refined. God is going to be blown into oblivion by an act of disintegration exerted in collaboration with my right ear and all that it holds by way of putrefaction.
Again, it's this magic of the body, the reassembling of that cosmic being. And he's talking about, I'm going to destroy this. The problem is this patriarchal masculine, right? That won't stop fighting with everything. And I'm going to destroy it, and I'm going to do it with this aspect of my body, right? He's showing, for his magic, you really have to embody it physically and imagine it physically, where you are literally sitting on that throne. You are literally this God creation, and you are dictating your will. And this is what he's setting out to do, to destroy that violent masculine force, right? All that it holds by way of putrefaction. What a powerful image.
Very. And he's talking about, putrefaction, this black alchemy.
Yeah. Again, yeah, black alchemy going back into the decaying matter, Wow. Blown into oblivion. He's going to suck it back into the womb, You're going back where you came from.
An act of disintegration. God must be broken down.
Right? Hail the conqueror worm.
Yes. So next he says, and along with that, all the forces of the heavens can come hurtled down upon me, since I know too much about the hole, anal or vaginal, through which they emerged. You're going to see it, the anger that they believed they'd extinguished through pain. That slow-moving, nutritional, silencing pain that belongs to time. It's still there like a flame of cholera.
Whoa. Nutritional. I wonder why all of, he's writing it in such a way.
Yeah, interesting choice of typography.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking down the nutrition almost.
Right? And he's connecting this thing of the creation with the expelling of excrement, the vaginal and the anal, this, the duality, right? Like we see with the sun and the solar anus, like in Bataille, or the sun and the black sun. Wow, powerful stuff. He
talks a lot about excretion in To Done with the Judgment of God. There's a whole section called Research on Fecality. And he says, there where it smells of being, it smells of shit.
Right. He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. And just the idea of this pain, the anger that they believed they'd extinguished through pain.
Right.
You know, it's like they're instilling pain to dull their own anger, but in reality, it's just perpetuating it. It's a silencing pain that belongs to time and is still there like a flame of cholera waiting to burst out again. The anger that has not been assuaded, you know?
This is a constant theme that you see in a lot of metaphysical religious writing, regardless of tradition, but this idea of how do you deal with this tendency to violence and anger, right? You know, Christ, right, is this image of that divine forgiveness, that ability to live and let live, that calls people to become that perfected person who lets go, right? Athena is that one who comes and silences the Furies, transforms them into humanities, and calls us to set up courts of law, right? This is such a profoundly human thing, learning to overcome this tit for tat and to let go of the violence, to take the hit and not hit back. Right? Powerful.
Right. Very powerful. So next, we have a bunch of more magical writing. Fortoben Gardu, Koran Ko, Hartu, Totarenkegno, Totarenke, Kotarengarda, Takoranka. In order, love, blood, soul, blood that will work. Gold hasn't covered up the blood, you reverend gentlemen of Rome and of Lhasa.
Whoa. Reverend gentlemen of Rome and of Lhasa. So Lhasa, that's the capital of Tibet.
Okay.
Reverend gentlemen of Rome and of Lhasa.
Gold hasn't covered up the blood. So it's like, is he saying that the riches, you know, the appeasement through riches does not satisfy the blood, right? Or the letting of the blood? The violence? The violence can't be bought away?
Well, I think what he's showing is he's talking about how this greed magic, right? So there's a lot of, you know, the Empire of Rome is one that's founded on it has this deep magical foundation, but it's one that's built upon blood, right? And greed. And I think he's also saying that of the Tibetan Empire, right? Which managed to create this monastic theocracy that was able to rule across the Himalayas and create this lifestyle of pursuit of this mysticism above all else, and was able to live without any kind of like the freedom that these monastics and the power that these monastics wield in that ancient Tibetan theocracy is incredible, you know. So I think he's talking about how all of their blood in you know, and all the gold that they have in these kingdoms and these perfected little empires, whether it's the military empire of Rome or the spiritual empire of Tibet, it's all bullshit, you know.
Yeah,
it's all based in blood. It's still that same blood. It's still rape and violence. You guys haven't actually overcome or dealt with any of it, you know. Whether it's one that's purposefully engaging in it or one that's trying to, you know. The other thing is with the Tibetan one is these are people who are trying to remove themselves, right? They've gone to the highest point. They're not engaging with the rest of the world. They're just doing their own fucking thing. But that's also an evil of a kind, you know, and they're still failing to overcome the violence. Rejection is now no better than what the Romans are doing either, right? You have to learn to transform violence, right? As Athena does. Anyway, my 2 cents.
I agree completely. It's a fascinating input. So now we have the last 2 pages. I'll read them in succession. And they've made me plummet into death there, where I'm ceaselessly eating cock, the anus too, and shit for all of my meals, all those of the cross. So the same figure returns every morning. He is an other, in order to accomplish his revolting, criminal, and murderous sinister mission, which is to maintain the state of bewitchment cast upon me, and to continue to make of me this eternally bewitched man, etc., etc.
Holy, whoa, that is so dark and that is so wild. He saw the Christian church for what it was, that they were casting this black magic upon him to lie to him and keep him eternally bewitched. Wow, what a dragon.
That's the last thing he wrote before his death. Presumably, it would have been March 3rd, just before he passed. And so I have two little short fragments at the end here.
That's so wild. Just before, I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay. In order to accomplish his revolting, criminal, and murderous, sinister mission, which is to maintain the state of bewitchment cast upon me, right? Everything about this world is about us being denied our true reality as this cosmic perfected being, right? As this universal oneness. We can all enact the magic that Artaud is engaging in, right? We can all act from that position of authority and create ourselves. But there's these black magical forces that want to bewitch us and keep us blind to this, to our truth. And there's, he's fighting them. And this is the last thing he wrote. Wow.
Yeah, and so this is, I think, why they called the collection a Sinister Assassin, is because of this passage here.
Yeah. Scary stuff.
Very scary. So I just have two short little things to round off the presentation with. These are both from smaller texts, which are at the beginning of the collection, and these were all published in their entirety in the magazine 84. And you can read them. These are just sections of longer fragments. So first, all of us are enveloped by a secondary humanity, a humanity that is malevolent and sinister, which draws its roots from within the bodies of everyday human beings, who at certain moments realize they have become vampires and brutally start to act as vampires. Those people are among the ones who didn't kill the beast in themselves as it was being born. They're the ones who refused to detach themselves from the beast because they were too attached to it.
Wow. Becoming the vampire. That's in the, that tyrannical image. I think of that Saturn, right? Eating and consuming his children in order to maintain his authority. That humanity that refuses to die and transform, that resists transformation.
There are those who recognize the beast within themselves, but they can't break away from it. They're accustomed to the violence. They know the violence. And so they violence. And this could be spoken, I think, of like generational trauma and the perpetuation of trauma in society in general, where the people are harmed, and they're not, because of the way society is set up, they're not really shown the chance to love themselves again. And they take this pain that they've instilled, that's been brought upon them, and they lash out. They become attached to the beast, and they start to act as the vampire because it's all that they know. All they know is trauma and pain, and they need to be shown another way.
I think a lot of this too is a projection about how we view certain aspects of the human condition and put things through this moralistic lens. Like I think like Artaud's coming out of this Catholic world, right? We have to imagine that you have all these people who are constantly begging for forgiveness and asking for atonement from their sins from this clergy, and taking confession and trying and desperately in this ever presence of saving themselves. And think about how often those sins are these repeat sins. Oh, I lied. Oh, I masturbated. These things, these human things that we see them as this negative, but they're acts that we can't help but engage in. And then it winds up being this resentment of the self, the self-fulfilling resentment, especially if this is something intrinsic to something like, who you love or whatnot, and they tell you that's evil. And now you feel like this outcast, right?
Definitely. Powerful piece, very powerful.
Yeah.
And this last one, I think it's just a nice setup for our next Artaud episode. Organs have only ever been made in order to give beings something to eat, while beings have been condemned in their very conception and have no reason to exist in the first place. Reality itself has not yet come into existence because the true organs of the human body have still not yet been created nor positioned into place. The theater of cruelty was created in order to complete that putting into place and to accomplish through a new dance of the human body a crushing of this world of microbes, which is nothing but a coagulated abyss. The theater of cruelty is intended to make eyelids dance in intimacy with elbows, with kneecaps, with femurs, and with toes, and you are now going to see all that.
Wow. The theater of cruelty was created in order to complete that putting into place and to accomplish through a new dance of the human body a crushing of this world of microbes with nothing but a coagulated abyss. This makes me think immediately of that image of the cosmic dancing Shiva, who destroys and creates the universe through his dance, right? He's crushing on one hand this demon underfoot, but he's also bringing about this new rebirth, right? Wow. That's beautiful.
Just a beautiful passage. I thought it was a nice way to round things out.
Yeah, and it really talks about again that idea of the organs and the body, the theater of the cruelty, quintessential Artaud.
Quintessential Artaud, and his talking about this crushing this world of microbes. He believed that God, the creator, the demiurge, exists in his microbes and in his organs, and is seeping power from him. And he needs to remove his organs to become a pure being free from the demiurge.
Wild. That's amazing. So after going through all of this, what are your thoughts on a Sinister Assassin, and what do you think of Artaud at this stage of his life?
I mean, a Sinister Assassin is arguably my favorite collection that I own of all of his writing. I have 20 Artaud books, and this is my favorite, I think, because it shows him, despite the extreme pain that he's in, that we obviously can tell that he's in, he is still spitting spells at the forces conspiring against him, spitting spells at death, spitting spells at life itself, and
Right.
trying to create a life for himself in spite of the cancer, in spite of the pain, in spite of the trauma from the asylums. He's striving in vain to create a new life for himself, even in death.
Always seeking that transformation, always doing magic. Yeah, that was really powerful stuff. I loved the stuff with the drawings, the 50 drawings to assassinate magic.
Yeah.
That was profound. His understanding of the sigil as a living really shows you his animism at heart, right? And the fact, like, we have to understand that Artaud is rejecting this humanism. He's embracing the natural world, and he believes that there's no separation between thought and the natural world, even.
No.
And that his gestures, his magical intention, his artistic creation can all coalesce into this divine creation that gives life to a spell, which exists unto itself with its own will. Like, that was cool, interesting, and magical. Wow.
This fascinating collection of texts. I knew that you would get a blast out of them. 50 Drawings to Assassinate Magic is just one of my favorite works of his, and such a powerful, evocative title.
Right? Amazing stuff. So thank you so much, Graham. Set us up for our next episode. So we're actually going to jump back in time again before even our first talk. And we're going to look at not an early, but a career-defining text, we'll say, for Artaud. Probably his most popular text, The Theater and Its Double, right?
Yeah, so The Theater and Its Double, for just a quick little context. It's a collection of texts that were written from 1930 to about 1933 or 1934, but was not published until 1938 when he was in the asylums. And so it's a collection of all of his theories on the theater of cruelty and the importance of magic and ritual in performance.
Right. So it really collects all of his philosophy that was centered around the theater and his theatrical creations of that early period of his life before he went into the asylum and became the sorcerer that we just saw. So we're going to see the radical artist, right? This is his attempt to try and do public magic, to try and transform his society. And Artaud is interesting because he is both a success and a failure.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this is very quintessential about Artaud because they're financial failures. They're not seen by many, but everyone who saw them is wildly affected by them. And they almost take on a new life of their own in print and in rumor and in discussion and in the coffee houses, you know?
It's true. He's very successful in the sense that the ideas which he presented persist to this day in art. And while he did not see maybe commercial success in his lifetime, I think he would be content to know that there are people today still talking about his work, you know? I think that would
exactly. And that's I think that's the truest sign of someone who's like one of these quintessential magical dragon figures is that they also had a profound effect on artistic creation, you know, and they were able to transform things or bring about a new perspective. And Artaud definitely did that, you know. Wild character. I'm excited to talk about more with you next week when we do the theater in its double. So before we leave, though, I also want to remind everyone that tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern, Dion and I have our show, Occult Explorers. For this episode, we're doing something really fun. We're doing a whole new series called The Epicurean Guide to Lucifer, where we're going to be looking at Lucifer, Satanism, and satanic literature that's coming out of the European upper class and aristocracy. You know, we're going to be examining a lot of Hollywood and European cinema, things like The Ninth Gate, Dumas, the Club Dumas. We're going to look at just Dario Argento, all of this kind of weird occultism and aristocracy and haute couture or culture and all this. It's going to be interesting. Going to get wild and deeply satanic.
That's going to be great.
Right? So, Graham, talk to us about what you have coming up. When is your next release for your works, your books?
Right. So my next book that's going to be coming out very soon. I'm getting the cover formatted this weekend. Sacred Armaments Essential for Vanquishing Psychiatric Demons will finally be out towards the end of the month. And Metastani will follow in March.
Amazing. And Graham's links are all below. You also are releasing your EP soon as well, right?
Yeah, so that'll be out, I think, March 1st or somewhere around there, beginning of March. We're just finalizing the mixes.
Amazing. So make sure you check out Graham's links below and follow him and keep abreast of everything he's up to. You can buy all his books at his publication house, thingsinmychest.com. This was so much fun. Any last words for A Sinister Assassin and for our audience today?
I would just have to say that in the face of hardship, there is a way through. And whether it's magic or just love or the passion for yourself and the world around you, you know, cling to something to help you push through.
Yeah, life is worth living, you know. That's something that Artaud stresses. He gazed into the abyss. He saw that blackness and he said, F no. And all of his magic was about reforming that body, maintaining that body. You know, a body without organs, but still a body, right? But yeah, Graham, thank you so much. This was so much fun. And thank you all for tuning in. It was great to see everyone. And make sure you come in next week when we continue our deep dive into Artaud with the theater and its double. All right. Good night, everyone. Take care. Oops.
Master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye. And I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who